Hi everyone, my name is Arielle and welcome back to my channel and welcome to part 2 of my PCT Q&A series. In this video, I'm going to go over all of the logistics and planning questions that have been coming in over the last couple weeks since I finished my hike. But before I dive in, I just want to note a couple other videos that you may find helpful if you're doing like a deep PCT dive for information. So first and foremost, I have a gear video where I do a full gear review of the gear that I started my through hike with and how that compares to the gear I finished my through hike with. So if that's something that interests you, I'll put the link somewhere above on the screen and down in the description box below. And then I also have part 1 of this Q&A series where I answer the personal questions, like all of the things that pertain to me specifically, my experience, and yeah, just some of the fun details that are a little bit more than just logistics and planning. So again, I'll put the link above on the screen or in the description box below. And lastly, if you're just finding me through this video, I did vlog my entire through hike. So if you want a more of like an immersive experience of the trail, I have 24 episodes that take you all the way from the Mexico-California border to the Canada-Washington border. And again, I'll put the playlist above on the screen or down in the description box below. Without further ado, let's jump into today's Q&A. Okay, so first question is, what is the permit process? And the PCT permit process is actually something that continues to evolve and it changes a little bit year after year. I would say that this year there's some major differences than when I applied in the past. And so I want to put the official PCTA website here on the screen. And I would say that if you are looking to apply for a PCT permit, definitely check out that page. And I'll put the link in the description box below as well, because you want to make sure that you have all the details that you need. The main differences between applying for a permit in previous years and now is that you have to pre-register, and you have to pre-register a little bit in advance to the actual release date. So before, you just wanted to create an account before the time that the permits were being released on that release date, and now you actually have to pre-register. So by the time that this video is live for 2023 permits, the fall release date will the release date itself will not have passed, but the registration window will have. So if you hadn't already registered for that, then you'll have to jump on to the January one, and you definitely still have time to pre-register for that. Basically, this is the same as has happened in the last couple of years. They release 35 permits a day for the start dates of March, April, and May in the late fall time. And then they do another round of permits that they release again for the start dates of March, April, and May in like January time. This is also the time in January where you would apply for southbound permits, or if you wanted to do like long section hikes. So again, if you're watching this and you don't already have your PCT permit, but you're looking to go in 2023, make sure you get yourself pre-registered so you can jump on that next registration and application release. And if you're watching this in future years, again, definitely check this link because it's quite possible things will have changed. I think they're just trying to make the permit experience better, because having been through that process 2 times now, it's yeah, definitely can be pretty frustrating. One really awesome change that they've made this year is that you can actually link your accounts if you are planning on hiking with a friend or a partner, so that you guys can apply for the same start date, which seems so basic, but it was actually like a big challenge in the past, because it is kind of it has been a really interesting application process. So that is one really positive change that I am excited for all of you future through hikers that they've added in. All right, I could not leave this question out. Basically, the question is, how old is too old to hike the PCT? I had someone, I think they said they were 41 years old and they were wondering if that's too old. I just want to tell you that I met people out there on the trail that were doing the entire through hike that were like 75 to 77 years old. And that's just people that I met. So I would say don't let your age get in the way. There were literally like kids, like a whole family that went out and hiked a good chunk of the trail this last year, all the way up to, you know, people in their late 70s. So I would say there's not like really a too old. It's just a matter of like you and your experience and your health and your fitness. But just know that like you can take your time, you can do it slow. You can also do it in sections. So if you are on the older side of the spectrum and still dreaming of a PCT through hike, don't give up your dream. Know that there are totally people out there of all different ages experiencing the PCT. How much training do you need? This is a really common question, especially I think because people hear the big mileage days that people are doing on their PCT hike, you know, when people are doing 20, 25, 30-mile days, obviously you think of like the fact that you would need to train for that. And I think the most important thing to know is that you do build fitness while you're out there on the trail. While myself and the people I hiked with did build up to doing 25 and 30-mile days, like that wasn't standard for us in the beginning by any means. We started on the lower end at like 15 miles a day, and there were also plenty of people out there starting with like 8 or 9 or 10 miles a day, just kind of depending on where they were with their fitness levels. Obviously, if you're going to start on the lower end, you need to start a little bit earlier so that you have time. But I would say the biggest thing with trying to determine how much you need to train personally is really just thinking about your current fitness level and what you're currently capable of and how long you think you want to commit to your thru hike. Just know that no matter what, as you get out there, you're going to build up strength and you're going to get stronger. So you do not have to be doing your maximum number of miles per day right out of the get-go. In fact, I definitely recommend against that. So I know that that's kind of like a little bit more of an open-ended answer than maybe you would have hoped for. But the truth is, it really is open-ended like that. I just live like more of an active, healthy lifestyle. And I didn't really do any specific training for the PCT this time around because I just didn't have the time. I in school and I, was working and I just couldn't make like a deeper training plan happen this time around. But I had a friend who was hoping to do a sub 100 day attempt on the trail, which she was successful in. And she did train pretty rigorously for about 2 months prior so that she could start her days with, doing 20 miles a day or more. So again, I know that's a little bit open-ended, but I hope it just gives you some perspective for what to think about when thinking about training for your hike. How do you prepare mentally? Okay, so this is kind of tough because it's a little bit more abstract, but personally, I'd say there's 2 things that you can kind of do to really prepare mentally, or there's 2 things that come to mind. The first would be to really understand your why for being out there, like your deeper why, like what's keeping you out there on trail. Because if it's not something that's like, if it's something superficial, when things get hard, because they will, there's going to be days that absolutely suck out there, and that you start to question, whether or not you still want to be out there. You have to have a deep enough why or deep enough reason for hiking that's going to help you push through when times get tough. So I would definitely spend some time thinking about that, maybe journaling about it, and maybe journaling about like what would be the things that you would allow yourself to get off trail for, like if, like what are the non-negotiables and the negotiables, if that makes sense. But I'd say like doing some of that thinking ahead of time will really help you when you're out there and things get tough, because you'll already have something to turn to. And then the other thing I would recommend is just doing things that challenge you, like doing other things that challenge you. So if you're afraid of heights, maybe trying rock climbing on a top rope at a gym or with a friend who's really experienced, and allow yourself to push through some of those mental challenges, because it does kind of apply, even though rock climbing and through hiking are not the same thing. And that's just one example. I feel like the more places in our life where we mentally challenge ourselves and we prove to ourselves that we're more strong and capable than we thought we were, the easier it is to apply that in other aspects of our life. So go out there and challenge yourself and let yourself be reminded that you are so much more badass than you give yourself credit for. How much money do you need to hike the PCT? Now, this is a question I'm hoping to kind of go over in more detail in a future video, kind of do some breakdowns and stuff of my own finances from the trail. But just to give you a brief overview, I'd say the number that most people aim for as far as like having saved before they hit the trail is roughly $10,000. I would say that was like the most standard number I came across. Now, I definitely think you can through hike the PCT on $10,000 or potentially even less, but you would have to be really mindful. It is a little bit more expensive than I think you realize, because in the end, even though, yes, you're out there in the wilderness for large chunks of time, you are coming, into towns to resupply. And when you come into town, you're tired and you're hungry and, you know, like you smell bad and you want to shower, and there's like all these little things where it's really easy to spend money very, very quickly. Obviously, when you're out on trail, you're not spending very much money, but you know, those 1 or 2 days a week where you're in town, that's when you're buying all of your food for the entire week or everything like that. So I would say that you just kind of have to keep in mind where your money is going. And the biggies would be, the biggest for sure is lodging. So if you really want to dramatically cut back on the amount of money you spend on the trail, or if you're on a tighter budget, spending less on lodging will really help you out. Most of the trail towns will have cheap or even sometimes free options. You'll be doing a lot more camping if you are taking this route, but there are generally places where you can go get showers and things like that. So you may not be as comfortable as if you got an Airbnb or if you got a hotel, but you will save a ton of money by doing it this way. The other way to save money is to, you know, being more mindful of what you eat. Because I had some like major health stuff over the years, eating well and trying to maximize my nutrition as much as possible meant that I probably spent a bit more on food than the average person out there. For example, those dehydrated camp dinners are going to be much more expensive than if you go out there and make yourself a ramen bomb. But for me, that was like one of the main places I got my nutrition for the day. So again, you just kind of have to figure out what is important to you, but the biggest ways you can cut expenses and costs is going to be with lodging and with your food choices. I also think it's important to note on that gear is obviously something that is quite expensive, and if you were to buy everything brand new, it's going to be a couple $1,000s, but you don't need everything brand new. I know it might feel like that, especially on here on YouTube. I feel like everything that's people post about is being ultra light, and yes, having a lighter pack will make your experience more enjoyable. You are more likely to make it to the end if your pack is on the lighter side, but it doesn't mean that you have to have a 6-pound base weight to make it to the end. So if you have gear that works for you, and maybe it's not the most ultralight, but it's on the lighter side, know that you can still use that gear, and you may end up letting your gear evolve as the trail goes on, but it's probably better if you're on a really tight budget to not worry about shaving off a pound or two for your tent and being able to have that extra $800 to put towards things like food and lodging and things like that you might want down the trail. That's just my opinion. Some people might disagree, but I also, if you've watched a lot of my other videos, my backpack was light, but it was not the most ultralight version, and I totally, made it through to the end just fine. Can dogs hike with you? And something I'm going to add kind of to this question is, should dogs hike with you? So technically, dogs are allowed on a good majority of the PCT. There are some sections of the trail where dogs are not allowed, specifically in the national parks. So if you were to try to bring your dog on a full through hike, you would have to either skip those sections or have someone help you with a workaround. That being said, I think the topic of should you bring your dog is important. I think it's going to be really personal. You know, what's right for one person isn't going to be right for the other, but it is a big undertaking. It is a lot more of a undertaking to take your dog on a thru hike than it would be just like a normal backpacking trip, especially some of the environments you come across on the trail. You know, there's days in the desert where just managing your own water is quite a challenge. And so, you know, knowing that you would have to make sure that you carried plenty of extra for them. You would need to be carrying some of their food. And I know that dogs have backpacks, but you'd also have to make sure that they're used to carrying that much and for that many miles, and not just that many miles, but days with that many miles stacked back to back to back to back. It's a lot. It's a lot to ask of a dog, and they don't really have the ability to plan ahead. You can't tell them what's happening later in the day and tell them that they should take a nap now because you have a big afternoon ahead of you, or that they should drink extra water because there's not going to be water for a while. So it is just a lot to manage. But that being said, you know, every person and their dog is different. And so you may decide that that's bringing your dog can totally handle it. There were dogs out there on the trail. There was very, very few and far between. And yeah, I would say that the biggest thing is if you decide to bring your dog, is just you have to put their health and well-being before your like through hike, if that makes sense, because it's you might find when you get out there you get really attached to your through hike and your whatever is going to look like for you. And so if you were to bring a dog, I would just say like you have to make sure that their health and well-being is more important than that. And I would 1000% say that anyone out there with a dog on the trail this year, that's totally what we felt from them. And it was nice to see some dogs out there on the trail. Personally, I decided not to bring my dog. It just didn't feel right for us. But yeah, like I said, it's a little bit more complicated of a topic than it might seem. So yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. Is it safe for solo females? And this is something I talked a little bit about in the first Q&A, but I feel like it comes up again here in this topic as well. And the answer is yes, I felt safe. I was technically a solo female, although most of the time I was in a group, and only once did I hitchhike alone. All of the other times I was with a group, and I camped with my group every night. So, I feel like being with other people definitely makes things feel a bit safer. That being said, I did have friends who were solo, like female friends who were solo basically the entire time. And they also had a safe experience, and had a great experience and did hitchhiking and did all of those things. So I'd say like overall, it is really safe. Things do happen. Every single year there's some stories. So I think that you just have to be mindful and assess your comfort level. And if there's situations like hitchhiking, where you have the ability to be with others for that experience, I would say you might as well. But overall, I would say that it is safe to be out there as a female, as long as you are mindful and thoughtful of your surroundings. I feel much safer out on the trail and in the wilderness than I do in any major city. How do you meet people to hike with, and how do you find a trail family? So I talked a little bit about my personal experience with this in the last Q&A, but just to keep it short and sweet, you meet people out on trail. So I would say most of the people that I ended up hiking with, I met at a water source or at a lunch spot or like at a restaurant or wherever it is that hikers congregate. You'll find that, especially if you're hiking a similar pace to someone, you will see them day after day, water source after water source. And after, even just a day of running into them multiple times, you often have at least had one conversation. There's a sense of camaraderie. And if you find that you are hiking a similar pace and you do get along, then it's a pretty easy recipe for continuing hiking together, or at least camping together in the evenings. So I feel like I was a little bit intimidated by this process before I got out there. And I found that it was very, very seamless. And there are so many people out there, and most people out there on trail are looking to make friends and meet new people. So it's something that actually I feel like happens kind of naturally and seamlessly because of the culture of the PCT through hiking community. What's the best way to prevent injuries, and is it possible to hike without taking like ibuprofen? So I'd say there's two big factors that will be working against you in the preventing injury realm. So the best way to prevent injuries is to listen to your body, to take rest when rest is needed, and to not push yourself to your absolute max from the beginning and then never take any rest, which seems like common sense, but actually it happens to a lot of people. It's really easy to get caught up in it. So those big two factors working against you are getting caught up in that mindset of needing to, push the miles, do more right away from the beginning, especially if you had like a plan for how many miles you wanted to hike. And so you're trying to keep up with your personal plan, keep up with those miles, and maybe they're a little bit too ambitious. I also feel like for some reason, a lot of people are really against taking zeros or rest days. Especially if they're trying to like stay with a group or whatever. I feel really fortunate that the culture of the group I was in was to take a zero like once a week for, at least until the end of the Sierra, which was so helpful. And we had a really low injury rate in our group because of that, I think. And I know that I had said earlier that taking, having less like accommodation and taking less zeros is a way you can save money, but you can still take zeros and save money by finding cheaper options. Because I do think rest is something that gets seriously overlooked. And then another piece of that I've kind of touched on is like trying to keep up with your trail family or your friends. If you found yourself in a group that's just got a slightly faster hiking pace than your body wants to do, it's really hard not to want to push yourself every day to keep up with them, because it feels like it's going to be the end of the world if you get left behind and you have to find new people. And that's tough. I went through a period with my initial trail family that I thought I was having issues with my knees, and I truly thought that I was going to have to say goodbye to everyone. Luckily, after, zero, in town, my knees felt so much better, and like I slowly started to come back to life and like found my groove, and that didn't end up happening. But I had like a day or two where I was crying a lot on trail, thinking about like, okay, if this continues to happen and if I can't keep up with them, like I'm going to have to slow down, because finishing my through hike is more important to me than staying with this group of people. And I had to like remind myself that I can make new friends, that I can make it happen. So yeah, I'll acknowledge that factor is really challenging. And definitely works against you in the realm of like listening to your body, knowing when to rest. But I'd say like the biggest advice I can say for avoiding injuries is don't push yourself as hard as you possibly can, especially in the beginning, or until later in the trail. Like let yourself build up and take rest, because when you rest, that's when you repair all your muscles and everything like that. And so maybe that's 1 0 a week like we did, or maybe that's something different, but like, please don't discount like rest. It is such a game changer. And then can you get through without using ibuprofen and like NSAIDs? And I totally think so. I had like 4 tablets of ibuprofen, like 4 pills total for the entire trail until mid-Oregon when I injured my hip. And they were for headaches and I didn't take it for soreness. I didn't take it for muscle pain or anything like that. And so it's definitely possible. I'd say that, obviously you're going to have to be more mindful, be more aware of not getting injuries. So for me, the hip flexor injury that I had in Oregon, it came from, guess what? Of course, pushing myself too far. We did like 80 miles in 2.5 days, and my body decided that was too much, and I had to deal with that injury all the way to the end. So yeah, even that late in the trail, it's possible to get those overuse injuries. It's really easy to get caught up in that culture of like more, see how big a days you can get. And it's not to say that like you can't do some of that, but being able to be flexible when you notice your body is maybe not reacting well or needing more rest, and actually being able to take it. So yeah, that was a long-winded answer, but it's definitely tough, and injuries are super common. Pretty much everyone I know dealt with at least something, small or big, at some point on the trail. How do you know where to camp? So there is an app called Farout Guide, or it used to be called Gut Hooks, that is, pretty much everyone uses it to do the hike. It's really helpful because it shows all of the different campsites, how big they are. There's comments, people can comment about them, as well as water sources and things of that nature. And because it's crowdsourcing with the comments, you can get more details about like, is that water source still running right now? Or what's the quality of it? And then also, for some reason, a lot of the campsites are marked as maybe like a 2-tent campsite, but like, you could totally fit six tents there. So sometimes the comments will say like, hey, we actually fit 10 people here that night, or whatever, which is really, really helpful for planning, especially if you're in a larger group. Planning your campsites ahead of time, not more than like a day. We never really plan more than like a day, but planning that early in the day can be really helpful so that you can choose one that will accommodate your group. If you're going solo or just with one other person, there'll be a lot more options, but it's really important to only camp in established sites, just to really protect the environment and, lean into the leave no trace principles. So it's important to, when you're finding campsites, to make sure that they're already pre-established, which is one of the reasons why using Farout Guides or Gut Hooks is so helpful. On the topic of Farout Guides, Was the trail well marked, and is Farout/gut hooks easy to use? I would say the trail is fairly well marked, but I definitely leaned into using Farout. Farout is so easy to use, and I would say that like while most trail junctions and things like that are marked, and there are a fair amount of of the blazes, of the PCT blazes to keep you on track, there are definitely times where you are double checking like Farout Guide because it's just not super clear. So I would say that, yeah, you probably could get by just using the trail itself, but it is so nice to have the peace of mind of Farout Guide to just make sure when you go through a junction. And sometimes the trail makes, like the PCT would make like a hard right, and then but the trail still goes straight ahead. And I feel like that wouldn't be something you would intuitively think of. Whereas when you're using Farout Guides, it really helps you, notice when you've gotten off track. So, yeah, I hope that answers that question. What's the longest stretch between towns, and how often do you get food and water? Okay, so the longest stretch between towns, it kind of depends because you don't have to do the same towns. If that makes sense, there are a lot of different town options, and like I would say that there are more popular resupply stops that are kind of the more standard stops, but it's not something that everybody uses. Or there may be like something in between that, we didn't use, but someone else used. And so it's going to depend a lot on like your pace and kind of what you want out of the hike. So for us, our longest stretch was 135 miles, which we did in 6 days. And that was the stretch from Tehachapi to Kennedy Meadows South. But a lot of people didn't do that whole thing in one go and instead got off and went into Ridgecrest, which actually looked like it could have been a pretty easy option, especially if you had some support with like a trail angel arranged ahead of time. But even without, it seemed like there were trail angels kind of coming and going. So yeah, it kind of depends. For us, our longest stretches of hiking was 6 days. We did a handful of different 6-day hikes or 6-day sections where we're doing 6-day food carries. But most of them, especially once we got past the desert and the Sierra, were a little bit less. And again, that's just going to depend on your hiking pace. If you're walking slower, you might have some longer carries, or you might just decide to go into more towns. And sometimes if you're hiking faster, you want to go into more towns because then you can carry even less and you get to experience more of the towns along the trail. So the food and water part of that question, the food is just going to depend on the amount of time that you're in that section. So like, for us, we'd get food into the next town. And water also depends on the section and how much you have access to water. I would say that there's a lot of support, especially in the desert, for the big waterless stretches where incredible trail angels have been working really hard to maintain water caches when there isn't water available. But besides the desert and a small section in Northern California, you have plenty of water along the trail to fill up, usually like multiple times a day. How did you decide on your daily mileage goals, especially before even starting the trail? So I talked a little bit about this in one of the earlier questions, but basically I just thought of where I could start out in the beginning, where I would be pushing myself, but not pushing myself to my limit. And for me, that felt like 15 miles a day. I felt like, okay, I know I can do that. I'm going to be totally tired and worked, but as long as I take some rest days, like I can make that happen. And then in my head, I scaled up, like every couple of weeks, I'd add a few more miles or whatever. And so when I was using this to plan my resupply strategy, that's kind of was my game. My mental thought was like, okay, I would hike 15 for a week or two, and then I'd bump up to 18, and then I'd bump up to 20. Did it happen exactly like that? Absolutely not. It was more just to give myself a rough starting point. The lucky thing about this is you don't actually have to know exactly how many miles you're going to hike every day of the entire trail. I would say, you'll have a rough idea of what you think you can do that first week, and then you get out there and you try, and then you can adjust from there. And like I said before, you will definitely build up your fitness out there on the trail. So even if you get out there and you realize you can't quite hike as far as you had planned in the beginning, just allow yourself to continue to build that scale and build in rest, and you will be blown away by how many miles you can start hiking after a period of time. You really do get strong, and you really do build up to some of those bigger mileage days, which is really cool to see. How do you know / calculate where to mail resupply based on your hiking speed? Okay, so this is kind of just building off of the last couple questions. I do have a video that I made before I started the trail where I go over my entire resupply strategy, including a really nerdy and detailed view of a spreadsheet that I built and instructions on how to like build it out yourself. Like there's a template included and everything. So if you're planning on doing like a bigger resupply strategy, I definitely recommend checking out that video. I do have a couple of suggestions or little tweaks that I would make now that I've hiked the trail, which I'll cover in the next question, but I would say that video is a really helpful resource for planning resupply. For planning all the resupply stuff. Okay, so that ties perfectly into this next question of how would you prep for resupply now that you finished the trail, and would you change anything from your original plan? 100% I would make some changes. And I'll give you some thoughts. So again, if you are planning on sending yourself resupply boxes, I do have a video that goes really into detail of how I set up my resupply strategy. But the main changes that I would make would be, I would probably send myself less stuff ahead of time. I still, as someone with like food sensitivities, I'm gluten-free, and so I needed to make sure that I was always going to be able to find like gluten-free. I was always going to be able to have gluten-free trail food, which is not impossible, but it can be on the harder side of things sometimes. I still would send myself like majority of the places I would send a box ahead of time, but I wouldn't include so much stuff in the boxes. So the first couple of weeks, I think my resupply strategy was fine. But you start to get sick of certain snacks and certain foods. And so I think that what I would do differently is I would continue to send myself the dehydrated dinners because buying in bulk allowed me to make them quite a bit cheaper. And for me, that was like such an awesome staple to have that nutrition and have something that was like actually really delicious at the end of the day, and that it was a gluten-free option because ramen is not gluten-free. So I would definitely send myself those, and maybe like some snack things, but I feel like I got pretty sick of most of my snack stuff and ended up kind of tweaking it or changing it out there anyways. So I feel like I might keep my earlier trail boxes pretty full, and then do less later on. Alternatively, like a much easier option would be to not send yourself anything for Oregon and Washington and doing those boxes for yourself later when you're on trail. It's very, very easy. Washington is somewhere that a lot of people do send themselves boxes, but they build those boxes in Oregon. So when they get to like, let's say Bend, where they have access to like all of the things, then they'll take, a day or two to build all of their Washington resupply boxes in Bend, which I think is a great option. So I definitely would recommend something like that. And I would also say if you don't have any food, what's the word I'm looking for? Like needs, specifications, you could totally just resupply basically along the whole trail, except Washington. You would want to send yourself some boxes for Washington, but there's decent options in pretty much every single town that you go through. Some will obviously be better than others, but these towns are really set up for thru hikers. So I would say that, unless it's something that really interests you or excites you, or you're really, really, trying to eat as healthy as possible, or you have like dietary restrictions, you could totally get away with just resupplying as you go and then just sending yourself boxes for Washington in Oregon. The only thing I would say with that option is make sure you have enough money for your food, because for me, I had purchased most of my food before the trail, so I wasn't spending a lot of money on trail food while I was on the trail, whereas if you don't spend any of that money ahead of time, you will need to spend it while you're out there. How hard is it to eat healthy? It's pretty hard. I would say that you know, my strategy was to have a healthy foundation and then to eat what I could, you know, eat what I wanted to eat out there because, yeah, your food starts to taste a little bit bland and uninteresting. So it's like you almost need this like hyper palatable food to make yourself eat, which I know might sound crazy, but like, yeah, in the beginning, it's so fun to eat all the stuff and you're, you know, eating all the ice cream and eating whatever you want. And it like, the novelty wears off kind of quickly though, at least for me, you know, I just like really missed real food. So I tried to just have like a foundation of things. Like I had some greens powders things and I had, you know, the dinners and those sorts of things. And I tried to eat like whenever I'd get into town, like I'd get my root beer float, but then I'd also try to get like, you know, something that was a bit more nourishing and get some vegetables in and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know really anyone who managed to eat like really, really, really healthy out on trail, but I would say that if you're really interested in eating healthier, you're going to have to send yourself more boxes. But word of caution, you may end up caring about it less than you think once you get out there. And also you may end up getting really, 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 really sick of your healthy treats that you love so much in your regular life. What do you do with your food every night, particularly when you no longer have your bear can in the Sierra? Okay, so in the desert, most of us just had really basic ultralight food bags that we kept in our tent with us at night. And then in the Sierra, you have your bear can where you put not only your food, but anything that has a scent, and you put your bear can away from where you're sleeping. And so, you know, if you were camping with a group, everyone would just pile their bear cans in like a particular area that was away from where all the tents were. And then after that, it's kind of, I'd say it was kind of all over the place. I own something called an Ursack, which is a bear resistant bag that I've found to be really awesome. It's much lighter and easier to like use, like easier to fit in your bag than a bear can, but still rated really well for like protection from bears. And so I would use that and tie it up, you know, tie it to a tree away from my tent at night for all of the bear areas that we were in. When we were not in bear areas after that point in trail, I would just keep my food bag in my tent with me and not go through the extra effort of tying it up. But I did end up using the Ursack all the way till the end. The nice thing about it is it's like semi-critter proof as well. So you're less likely to get like, you know, mice or things biting through it. That being said, that was not the standard. Most people did not have Ursacks. Most people just went back to their kind of regular food bag and just kept it in their tent every night. So I think it just kind of depends on you and what you're comfortable with. And for, you know, me growing up in Colorado and in bear territory, it just, you know, for me, I feel the most comfortable being as bear aware as possible and being mindful of that. But yeah, like I said, standard, most people just would keep their food bag. Once we were out of the, you know, the Sierra bear can zone, they would just have their regular food bag and just keep it in their tent at night. Okay, last question. What do you wish you knew before starting? I guess the biggest thing is that like, it won't go according to plan because so many things happen that are out of your control. And with that, it's actually kind of freeing because in the end, you know, you don't have to have it all figured out before you go, and you can't really, because obviously it's important to do your research and to be prepared. But at the end of the day, it's just as important, if not more important, to be flexible and to be able to learn on the go, because so many of the things that I thought were going to happen or that I was going to want or whatever it be, I just really quickly didn't, you know, was not the case, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'd say the biggest thing is just being open-minded and trusting that it will all work out regardless of what happens and that you'll figure it out. So yeah, I hope that answered some of your questions. I know that covered kind of a broad variety of things, but I was trying to nestle it down to the things that were going to be most helpful for logistics and planning. And yeah, that's all I have for you this week. As always, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. In the next couple of weeks, I'm heading out on an adventure to New Zealand and Australia. So we're actually going to jump back into vlogs for a little bit. And I'll see you then.